what is going on with the new proposal for Next. TLDR, they're rethinking the flow of how routes and URLs represent both data and components inside of your React tree. This is a huge expansion on Next.js's file-based routing to include a lot of different ideas and in a lot of ways catch up to what we saw Remix doing to take more advantage of React 18's like suspense streaming features as well as server-side components and like the new SSR models. And to an extent, it's just Seb flexing because they now have enough like buy-in to do some crazy stuff. Yeah. Without further ado, let's dig in. Oh, this isn't the post. This is the blog. Cool. Here's the post. So in here, they start with the new layout system. They go into server components a bit. They discuss data fetching, then React 18 features and how those will be used within all of those. The new client and server routing ideas, which they, I believe, say they're not fully certain about yet. It's still a proposal compared to the other stuff, which seems much further along. The incremental adoption promise, which is cool, but oversold. I just, like, my routes are not the hard part. Just break my shit. And advanced routing conventions like off-screen stashing and instant transitions. I have read about a third of this and skimmed about a third past it. I figured if I'm going to read this in depth and it's not going to be, yeah, I guess this is work relevant. I will be adopting this at Ping, but like, why not double dip and make some content out of it? So yeah, let's read. The new Next.js router will be built on top of recently released React 18 features. What was funny is when I read this originally, this sentence wasn't finished. The new Next.js router will be built on top of the recently released, period. And then they had to go edit it after. I almost posted a tweet about it, but looks like they fixed it. We plan to introduce defaults and conventions to allow you to easily adopt these new features and take advantage of the benefits they unlock. This sentence has like 2 times the words it should. Yeah. This RFC will be divided into 2 parts. Part 1, this post, and part 2, the next post, which will be more advanced examples with suspense stuff. Interesting. Exciting. And part 1, the overview of the new routing system, which is what we'll be reading right now. The motivation of this is that they've been gathering feedback. They did a developer survey. They found that the experience for creating nested routes and layouts could be improved, in particular, as they say here, like dashboards and consoles, where you might have like /dashboard/user/ID, and you want to keep the search bar above, but you want to render a different body component based on which of those subroutes you're in. That's what the new routing's designed to enable for dashboard-like scenarios. I'm not fully sure what they're referring to by off-screen stashing. I have some ideas, but I'm going to wait till I dig into it to comment too much on it. Also good to see you here, Lee. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah. And as they said here, they want to make sure all the changes they make here are backwards compatible. I have said many a time before, I think that backwards compatibility is a little, I don't want to say oversold, but people put a lot of effort into backwards compatibility, and I totally get why. This allows all of these new things to be adopted much sooner. My concern is usually that it feels as though some amount of agility or flexibility is always lost when you work really hard for backwards compatibility. I like the idea here where there's 2 different directories, one with new behaviors and one with the old ones, so you can incrementally migrate. Spoiler, that's part of how they did this. But I'm always a little concerned when backwards compatibility is called out so often and so high up. That said, incredible work that y'all did to make it so we can adopt these new patterns without having to rewrite our entire route table. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Terminology. This RFC introduces new routing conventions and syntax. The terminology is based on React and standard web platforms terms. Throughout this RFC, you'll see these terms linked back to their definitions below. These are like I actually really like that they started with this, since there are a handful of new ideas being introduced to the like Next.js mindset. I like that you're calling these out so early so that we don't have to figure out what we don't know as experienced React or Next developers ahead of time. I really like this idea. I wish more announcements and docs would take the time to define the terms that are new to the intended reader. Really good idea. Like that a lot. So the general new ideas are trees, which are a hierarchical structure similar to like the DOM itself and the nodes, or the virtual DOM and the nodes in the React tree. We have a subtree, which is a piece that is of a greater tree, starting from a root down. Then we have the URL path and the URL segment, which describe parts of the URL. The path is everything after the domain. Segments are chunks within. How routing currently works. This is a description of the current routing system in Next.js, where the pages directory is almost treated like an HTML directory with some fancy syntax around dynamic routes for catch-alls, grabbing variables, stuff like that. Mondays, you can always subscribe if you're having ads problems. Actually, quick tangent. There's a lot of y'all here. A lot of y'all are software developers. And I know a lot of y'all have Amazon Prime. And if you don't, you still probably have $5 to kick in. Give me a sub if you can. Link your Amazon account if you're already a Prime user, and you'll get a free subscription. That's just $5 a month that are sitting there. You'll no longer get ads. You'll no longer get interruptions. You'll even get access to the private channel in our Discord. Recently, I've been doing live coding in the private Discord channels. The first one was public, but it blew up. I plan in the future to do screen shares in short mini streams using ping code, things that I don't want to stream publicly for various reasons, but I still want to talk about. So yeah, give me a sub if you haven't already. It's a great way to hang out with the whole crew and contribute to somebody who is not making an engineer salary right now. So yeah, Twitch Turbo is a good option too if you want to get ad-free and continue supporting creators as well. But yeah, throw me a sub if you don't mind. Anyways, file-based routing. Previously, you would see a lot of stuff like this, like the double wrapping with triple dot to catch all of the stuff on the URL from here down. We use this a lot for things like TRPC, for things like our internal mini blog within our dashboard, so that we don't have to re-render the dashboard page to catch all of the blog posts that we're doing through Markdown in there. There's a lot of useful ways to abuse the syntax, but it is particularly limited when you want to do conditional nesting within it. You basically have to, from the highest point, or from the lowest point where you have dynamic URLs, you have to do a catch-all like this and then build your own router within it. So this change is going to be a huge shift away from that towards much more dynamic and structure-oriented patterns, and I'm excited for that. Layouts at this time before the new overhaul allow you to, per page, wrap a layout that provides certain things, like you could put a top nav in there, a footer, a sidebar, stuff like that. Generally, these are page level, so if you have a catch-all like this, the layouts are not particularly helpful. We also have data fetching, which, as I'm known for complaining about get server-side props a lot, the data fetching is done at page level, and hydrating the data all the way down is rough because you have to usually just prop pass that the whole way through. Getting updates and such is rough, and there is no type safety when you use GSSR. You also have the rendering paths, which Next.js gives you a handful of options. They have static generation, which is creating static pages. They still load the JS after, but the HTML gets stored on a server and you're fetching an HTML file when you go to the page, usually done at build. There's SSR, which is when you make a request, the server generates a new page based on that request. And then client-side rendering, which is the server sends back pretty much blank HTML, and then the JavaScript runs to populate that on the client side. This all changes with the app folder pattern that's introduced here. The big difference here is pages are almost rendered within, and as you go deeper, like dashboard/settings renders the dashboard layout with the settings components. I really like this idea because the majority of the time I have a nested route table the URLs are nested in a similar pattern. And I like this idea of combining the component structure and the URL structure at this high level with the folder structure to give a clear hierarchy of here is what renders at what layer. Really interesting change. I am pretty sure this is how people tend to set up their Remix stuff. With Remix, you can import and export wherever, so you can kind of work around it. But generally, this is the new routing. Yeah, I've seen this in a few other places. It feels like React Router in a folder instead of a big router in a lot of ways. Oh, I was looking at the old structure. Yeah, good call out. My bad. So yeah, dashboard/settings is would be a route or a folder within the dashboard folder. And then if you have a layout.js here, that will still apply to things deeper in. They have some very nice diagrams for how they're thinking of this here. They say root segment, leaf segment. The name root or route segment was chosen to match existing terminology. Thank you for this. Thank you for not using query param incorrectly or URL param. There's a certain router that I'm not going to subtweet too hard right now that thinks query param is something that it isn't, and it's frustrated me for a long time. So thank you for using the correct terminology. We appreciate you, Vercel. Layouts and creating UI. New file convention layout.js. They're really missing version docs. Yeah, version docs would be nice. Anyways. So far, we have used folders to define the routes, but empty folders do not do anything by themselves. Let's discuss how we use them. A layout is UI that is shared between route segments in a subtree. Layouts do not affect URL paths and do not re-render, so the React state is preserved when a user navigates between segments that share the same layout. So if you have a dashboard layout and then 3 sub-routes or sub-segments within that route in that tree, as long as /dashboard stays and a layout is applied there, anything in that layout will not re-render when you render the subcomponents. So if you switch from dashboard to dashboard/settings or dashboard/user, the dashboard layout should not be changed. There are 2 types of layouts, root and regular. So does root layout mean that it's put at the top at app and a regular layout is anywhere else? Okay, regular layout. Inside, yeah. So it's literally where you put the layout.js. With how good things were split up earlier, I don't know how I feel about this being bullet pointed and saying that there are 2 types of layouts. Do these architecturally behave significantly differently? Because to me, it doesn't feel like a meaningful enough distinction to be bullet pointed out and described with like a single sentence. There are 2 types of layouts. This feels like there's a huge fundamental difference between these that I should go out of my way to understand. But it seems like one is just applied a layer higher. I get it, but yeah, just want to make sure I'm understanding the intent on that one before I get too much further. Cool. Next section will help with this. Root layout. You can create a root layout that will apply to all routes by putting it there. Note, the root layout replaces the need for a custom app and a custom document since it applies to all routes. You'll be able to use the root to customize the initial and body. Yep, you're correct. This makes it very different. Thank you, Lee. And a regular layout lets you wrap with components but not access the root. That point, like body and such. That makes a lot of sense. I do like that. Yeah, actually, the more I'm thinking about this, I'm really liking it. Is the plan here that app.js and document.js are going to be slowly let go? Because if so, I really like that. I've complained a lot about the unintuitive flow of how a request starts at middleware, goes to document, goes through app, gets resolved to the page that it's supposed to be on, and then the content is rendered and sent to the user. With get server-side props called between document and app, that flow was always really hard to describe to new users. And flattening and or killing these two things together is going to make my life explaining these things even a lot easier. Yeah, Jacob just made a fun point. The irony is Theo and him are Next.js fans and loud critics. Anything I use a lot, which I use a lot of Next.js, I am going to have critique. But the reason that we are here and the reason that we have multiple Vercel employees hanging out in chat is because they want to improve their stuff. They want to hear the hard feedback and they want to make Next great. I've always felt that way about Vercel. As much as there are things I don't like in Next, the amount that it has benefited my teams, the work I and like the companies I work with do, and the amount of genuine good faith effort they've put into improving web development as a whole is impossible to ignore. And yeah, huge shout out to them for hanging out here and listening to us being harsh, because they know it's out of love, and it absolutely is. And thank you, Lee, for confirming that the move away from app and the app and document is intended, because that is very, very good to hear. I am happy with that change. Generally speaking, the less of these weird behavior underscore named things we can have, the better. I'll make a light exception for middleware, but even then I've had weird things that the current middleware model doesn't map great to. I'll rant about those in another stream or something, but I very much like the direction here. Cool. Regular layout. You can also create layout that only applies to a specific party or app through layout.js, specific directory. So like from here down, this applies. So in dashboard, you have a different layout than you have in your main app. Makes a lot of sense. One thing that would be nice, and I get why it's not a thing, is the ability to control body in these deeper places. And again, I totally understand why you can't, but we have a couple of use cases where we render a different background color on body depending on the platform. And that those different platforms have different URLs. So /embed is intended to be used within OBS directly, and we render a different background on the body for that. Right now, we're just importing a different CSS file, which is a bit of a hack. We might be doing a layout effect. We're either doing a layout effect or loading a different style CSS with an overload. Don't remember which, but the ability to control or meaningfully hook into body from a nested layout would be really nice. It would fundamentally change how the relationship between these layouts works, and it would break the consistency of from here down is from HTML tag and body tag down. But I would love the power to control some aspects of body from a nested layout. Cool. Yeah, in this example, the app layout would be applied as like the page level body. The dashboard layout would be applied when you go to analytics or settings. And if settings had a layout and settings had subpages like user, like permissions, then those would have the settings layout apply as you go deeper down the tree. For example, if you were to combine two layouts above, the root layout app/layout.js would be applied to the dashboard layout, which would also apply to all route segments inside dashboard/star. New file convention, page.js. Page is a UI that is unique to a route segment and required for a route to be valid. You can create a page by adding a page.js inside a folder. So this is kind of what index.js was before, if you put it inside of a folder or just had a named thing. But doing this and requiring page.js as the name makes folders the default pattern and lets you do a lot more with and within folders. I think I like this change. I'm going to have to see it a lot more. I generally am 50-50 on having a bunch of files in a code base with the exact same name. I have worked with a lot of developers that get mad when every component is named index.tsx, and I get it. It's annoying when you're navigating via Command P, but yeah, I don't know how I feel about this one yet, and I'm going to think a lot about it. So yeah, we'll think on that one. For example, yeah, so you can see here there's a header and footer that's from the root layout. The dashboard layout adds the custom dashboard sidebar, and then different pages load within. Really like the diagrams here. I think this helps a ton. Yeah, Yamon, thank you so much for the sub. Appreciate that a ton, especially knowing that you're like working out and listening in. Thank you for that. Cool. Turning off this light because it's blinding me. The other ones will be on. It's fine. You'll barely notice the difference. You can create a page.js file directly inside the dashboard folder to match the dashboard route. The dashboard layout will also apply to the page. That makes sense. If you don't put this, does that make dashboard an invalid route that 404s, but you can still go to dashboard/analytics and dashboard/settings? That's my assumption here. Page.js 20 results, yeah. The route is composed of two segments, the /root and the dashboard. Page components are the default export, layout components are the default. Layout components must accept a children prop. I like this. With the change to the default types around next components, or not next components, React components, with the React 18 type change where React FC no longer implies a children subprop, and you have to apply your own children prop yourself. My question would be, and I get why this wouldn't be the case, is this type safe? If I have a layout that expects a child of a specific type, so let's say I say children has to be a string, would the children pages now have to export a string where they're rendered here? I don't think that it's doable until the new file export type thing. I forgot the name of the PR, but there's a pull request up somewhere, or an RFC for TypeScript up somewhere that allows you to type exports by default via folder and via file. I don't understand it too much, honestly. I'm not very good at the TypeScript part of TypeScript, but knowing that this might be blocked, but a future where strict children typings, where a layout can specify, I only take children of this type or format, would be huge. Let's see some examples here. We have a root layout, HTML body, header, children, footer. Fun thing you did here, there's an indent here that I hate. I really hate that there's an indent here because it confused me that header and footer aren't the same, but these are self-closing. If these are self-closing, all three of these are the same level. Adam, you should not be gifting me subs. That's just like financially inefficient because I'm getting taxed with like the company's money's being taxed paying you, and now it's being taxed by Twitch paying me back. That's like triple dipping. We'll figure out something better for that in the future. Cool. But yeah, sorry, Lee. Go get that one fixed. I appreciate it. Dashboard layout. Got some fragments, has the sidebar, and then renders children from there. Then the analytics page is a subroute. So this would have dashboard sidebar applied, and then the header and footer applied as well. Above combination of layouts would render the following component hierarchy. Yep. Pretty much exactly what I expected. React server components. I almost would like, just to make it extra clear, since like the extra effort was done, maybe put a comment on the like each of these saying where it came from, or like diagramming it here so it's clear this like came from this part. With how good these diagrams are, there seems like a really good opportunity to put a diagram next to this code. React, I want to be clear. I am like picking nits real deep if I'm going that far in, but like, yeah, since the diagrams are so good, sneak one more in. React server components. Let's talk about this stuff because this is really cool. For those that don't know, React has been working really hard on getting a better server render pattern at component level, so a component can return HTML from a server rather than being a thing that is rendered on the client. With this RFC, you can start using the React features incrementally and adopt React server components in your next app. One of the biggest changes between pages and app is that by default, Files inside app will be rendered on the server as React server components. Allow you to automatically adopt React server components when incrementally migrating your app from pages to app. Very interesting for a lot of reasons. I am excited to see what happens when I raw port over and have a third of my stuff pseudo server rendering when I have so many dynamic like callouts trying to avoid it. So a quick layer of context on this for me, pretty much everything in our DOM tree can only be rendered on client because so much of it relies on like device information, like which cameras do you have available on your device, like audio playback info. There's so many different, how do I put it? There's so many things in our tree that require client-side render that I will effectively have to opt out of almost all of this really high up for it to work at Ping. So I'm excited to see how much of this I can use and how much I'm going to have to hack in order to use. But that's what we will learn over the next few weeks as I try to experiment with this stuff. You'll have granular control over what components will be in the client-side bundle using the new React conventions. I mentioned this earlier, there's ongoing convo about this still, where they're trying to decide what they want the patterns and like ergonomics to be around when you do or don't import something on, or when something's going to be rendered on client versus rendered on server. But yeah, as Lee said here, we still like haven't decided on if there should be .server.js, .client.js, or if we should import with a different syntax, like how we should determine whether or not something is client-side or server-side JavaScript. I am excited to see how this gets applied. Annoying that you're shipping this much and blocked on something like this. Thankful for the call out. I do really like how this was called out. So it's a soft, like, there's a discussion that we're watching. This is a really kind way of saying we're blocked externally. So appreciate that. Catching up on chat quick. I scroll so bad. I know it's not a universally held opinion, but I really love that Next has magic folders that do different things like app pages and uses folder structure to route. I like it. I don't love it. It's fine. Generally, routing is not a problem I think about a lot. It tends to be one of the easier parts of my day nowadays. And as such, I've consistently felt like we're over-focused on routing. I do get it, though. There are routing problems that need to be solved. From Lee, one of the hardest parts of this RFC, we still want it to feel easy like before, just drop a file in Pages, while still supporting the advanced use cases. Yeah, that is really hard. I got slightly blackpilled by Tanner Lindsley, the creator of React Query and most of the TanStack stuff. When he was doing his React location work, he got me pretty convinced that how do I put it? You kind of have to, in JavaScript, define your structure with the functionality there if you want ultimate advanced control. And React Location was a really cool demo of what you can do when you give that much control to the developers. I find I almost never need that, though. And as cool as it is to have a route level suspense behavior when data's loading in and a layout that is defined based on where you are in your URL structure, those are simple enough things to work around that I never find myself super hyped on huge routing changes. I want to be clear, this is very personal to me. I build very dynamic web apps without very many routes. Most of what I build, even something like Twitch, only has a dozen routes that are regularly visited, and then a handful of subroutes that are doing one or two static things. But in most of the apps I work in, there's a limited number of routes that we think about, and those routes tend to own most of their stories. For the use case that's called out at the top is dashboards. For a dashboard, for a page that like is an admin backend loading lots of data with nested stuff, this is gift from the gods. I am so excited for this, for our internal admin panel, for managing like the admin or the user experience, like for us behind the scenes at Ping. This is going to make life for that so much easier. And Next was not helping there before. A big part of why Tanner wrote React Location was so he would have something to throw in a route in Next and say, okay, from here down, React Location owns the story because I want to build a nested dynamic app that loads data with good hydration patterns from here down, but the rest of this is a standard Next app with standard file-based routing. This represents a good like compromise between the two, and honestly, I am so excited for Tanner's takes on this. I need to get him on the show soon. I've needed to for a bit, but now especially that seems very, very good to do. Let's keep going down. Let's look at the plan for client and server components. So in this example, the server renders the starter HTML and JavaScript that will hydrate further. The component or the user loads that. A client component renders that's client only, so the client has to render that one. And within there, there's a server component. Let's say it needs some data that's only on the server, and we want to send back HTML. My concern here is this represents a handful of waterfalls, ones that are probably architecturally necessary if you're designing it this way, but the idea of like the server sends a partially hydrated HTML file with like instructions on how to build the rest. It starts to build the rest and realizes it needs more from the server. And then from another like nested point down, it does another server request and gets back HTML. The harsh reality is most web apps are doing this anyways, but rather than getting back HTML, they're getting back JSON blobs and then doing the HTML part on their side. There's like 15 waterfalls on the Twitch homepage still, and we were trying to kill those. That's just the reality of single page app development. Is a component requesting data means that there's a lot of waterfalling happening. This being at app level, like at a higher like route management level, means it's less likely you'll see those patterns, because this would be this renders on server, this like subroute renders on client, and then fetches data from the server. But when this goes down to component level, we start seeing possible like rough waterfalls. And I'm curious what the plans are around that. However, in the app folder, the rendering environment is decoupled from the data fetching method and set at the component level. You'll still need to respect the constraints of client and server components. You'll not be able to use server-side props inside a page or layout that is a client component. Cool. One just random slight tangent. One of the things that was really sad for me about server components is while they are run on the server, they are not run in the server runtime safely and excluded from the client runtime, which would be really nice. One of the things I wanted to be able to do is like React query a Prisma function on the server, await that in there, and suspend until the server fetches from Prisma and then hydrates that HTML there. And then the client would be smart enough to take that response from the server and keep the data it gets and not request it again. That's entirely non-viable for a million different reasons, most of which are good. But I'm a little bit sad we still have to use get server-side props in order to get server-side data into a component rather than just awaiting a server call because we're technically on the server already. But we'll get there in some year, probably some decade at this point. But yeah, someday it'd be nice to await a server call inside of a component directly. You can actually do that in Electron right now, Thomas. You can just await FS in an effect and it works. So if that's something you're interested in, go play with that because it is really fun. Interleaving client and server-side components using the children prop, server component.js. Server component can be passed as a child of a client if both are wrapped in another server component. Okay. As long as there's a server component high up enough, you can interop between them from that point down. React Note needs to render server component on the server before sending the result, which doesn't contain any server-only code, to the client. What does this mean? Does this mean that the server components get server-side props isn't passed down? Or does this mean I can call Prisma in a use effect? Because this is very vague. And one of these is what it's already doing, and one of these is the future that it doesn't provide yet for good reason. But yeah, if any of the Vercel people are here to confirm quick, this does the latter. I can call Prisma inside of a component, and if it's defined as a server component in Next, it just won't pull that code and will hold the data and hold the properties properly. Just want to confirm that, because this is either groundbreaking or exactly the way things were. Is there an example? Please tell me there's an example. Data fetching, get static props, get static pass props, lame. Yeah, I use data. I had a proposal forever ago. If I go through my gists, I might be able to find it. See if I can find this. This was forever ago. It was also a convo with Tanner, fun enough. Proposal. Aha. I wrote this 11 months ago. Use backend. The plan was this would be a compiler step where use backend would be compiled out into an endpoint. Whatever you pass here gets put into a backend function. And then this gets replaced with a use query that has the API call. After I wrote this, I was introduced to TRPC, which was a much better way of doing this without the code gen step. But yeah. What I was asking is there anything equivalent to this? Maybe not with a custom hook, but ideally, if React was running in a true server-side environment, code sandbox, where we were guaranteed that this only runs on server, what we should be able to do, God, this gives me like no room anymore, would be const server side data equals use memo return. I guess use memo wouldn't work because this won't await, but theoretically a custom hook that lets you return await prisma dot user dot find first, this type of thing, where I could call server code inside of my component and get it first paint, not get it again, but effectively writing backend code inside of my components. Right now, same data fetching methods. Okay, cool. So this doesn't do any of that yet. This is still the standard get static props, get server-side props, and those will only run on server. I was just excited that we might be getting new data fetching patterns. More discussion needs to be done with the React level first. Will be dope. Right now, same. Yep, makes sense. Cool. Blog layout could be get static paths, which could be used to populate sidebar. Cool. Multiple data fetching methods in a route. To fetch data in multiple segments. For example, a layout that fetches can also wrap a page that fetches its own data. Interesting. Layouts being able to fetch data is pretty cool. Huh. Thinking. So my immediate use case for this would be a layout that has like nav bar in it, for example. So there's a nav bar that has your auth state. We can even go to ping because we do this not great right now. You'll see when I refresh this. Oh, you can't see it because I am covering it. I will hide myself for a moment and you will see that this pops in. It's not there statically. That's because this nav bar is client rendered and it fetches with next auth a session. And once it knows if it has a session or not, it chooses if it renders a sign-in button or if it renders this instead. This is not ideal. It would be awesome if the navbar could fetch the data it needs and always return a hydrated navbar with the data that it has to have to do that. The catch here would be now everything else that needs auth data would have to fire its own request for it too. So if in this example here, let's go to a better like structure example. Cool. So we have this one where we have the header and the footer. If the header and footer are coming from the root layout and these are fetching auth, now we have the dashboard, which also needs to fetch auth. Both of these now have to do the same request. And there is, as far as I know, no trivial way to like hook into the request that happened higher up here, unless I haven't seen that in the proposal so far. What I would kill for is a good pattern around, obviously I'm going to say in a type safe way, even though that makes this 100 times harder. A good type safe way to take whatever data is fetched in higher up routes and higher up, what's the term that we're using for the URL segments. So if we could fetch and carry any data that came from a higher up segment layout and know in this child, we have auth from this one. We have, so the pattern to access data higher up is just React children. So if a root layout required an additional, like let's say we added, or not root layout, in dashboard layout, we added an auth data prop here. So you have to pass auth as well as children. Would the things that mount that, like root layout, be smart enough to meaningfully pass data down? Or would I have to do a weird, like hawk type pattern where I'm calling children here with that data so it gets passed down? Like how would I go from data in root to data in dashboard layout without either dashboard layout fetching it itself or root layout doing a weird hawk style call here? This is why you send me the RFCs early, Lee. I told you. Yeah. Anyways, thank you for the honesty there. I am happy that I'm not crazy and that this seems very useful, but doesn't solve the common problems that I run into. Like the amount of times you usually have to fetch auth to use auth anywhere is hilarious. So excited for solutions around that. Context. That would actually work. Fuck. You're right, Maple. God damn it. If you, Lee, if you automatically wrapped every layout in a context that includes the get server side props for that layer and ideally names it based on the route it's in so that you can request from the route as like a nested object any server data that came from one above. And then you could have like app context.root.auth and have the auth that came from that route. Really clever. Good thinking, Maple. Thank you for bringing that one up. Good shit. The future of open source is a Twitch stream. This confirms it. Ideally, if you're using the context, you would use something like the use context selector stuff that Daishi built. Makes it even easier to rip from a context without constantly re-rendering stuff. Not surprised you've done this as well in Remix Maple. I've seen some of the chaos you've engaged with there. It's really cool. Yeah, it makes sense. And funny enough, until this moment, I hadn't thought of using context on the server. As dumb as that sounds, using a context for logical prop hydration through SSR is really interesting. With context being on the client side, it doesn't mesh with server routing or with server routing with server components. So context isn't honored over server boundaries. That kind of makes sense. Grr. Yeah, this is an interesting one. The back and forth. One step forward, two steps back. Grr. So yeah, it turns out JavaScript is hard. Who would have guessed? Thankfully, there's people much smarter than me, like half of the people in chat right now, who will think about these things. Yeah. Well, that was the interleaving. What else was there? Was there more about the data fetching stuff? Is it mostly data fetching in layouts? Multiple data fetching methods in a route, multiple segments of a route, get static. Honestly, this one's going to be dope for us for how we're doing our dashboard right now. Do I just show the code? Y'all want some cringy, like comically bad NextJS patterns? Let's take a look at how we're doing the dashboard right now. I want to be clear, as per usual, I detest this and I'm not recommending it or anything like it or that anybody do anything like it. Yeah. In the dashboard, I have a catchall.tsx because I have a in here. Where is it? Cool. I have a get static paths, which grabs all of the posts and creates a catch-all for each of these posts ID, which is the name in the blog posts markdown. So we write all this markdown. This gets parsed for the IDs. We create a bunch of paths for it. I have to empty string dump this or it doesn't work. I couldn't tell you why. Oh, no, this is so that it falls back on the page when we don't have one of these. That's actually why. There was a reason for that. It's annoying, but there is one. And then I have the get static props where I check if there's an ID. And if there is, I fetch that post. And if there isn't, I just return the empty post or the post data without the post itself. And then where do we actually render the post? Oh yeah, here. If there's post data, then we render the post modal. This allows us to statically generate the dashboard with the exact same layout on each of the dashboard / announcement post pages or subroutes, where this is the thing that renders different, which guarantees the rest of the page doesn't re-render when you navigate between things. We basically hybrid forced a page to work as a layout, a route table, and a data fetching method for posts. Now this can be 3 files that actually do what they're supposed to. So this type of like weirdly nested blog inside of a single page app went from a mess to a pleasant experience with that change. Really cool stuff. So we have the app blog layout, app blog, slugged page, use get static props. Next will statically generate both. Do you know what will happen if you have the same route in pages and app? I have not gotten to the backwards compatibility section. I'm assuming that this is further down. If we keep scrolling, then I think there's a section on that, but we've now hit the point where I haven't read at all from here down, basically. Different data fetching methods and segments across a single route affect each other. Server-side props in one segment will affect get static props in other segments. Since a request already has to go, the server will also render any get static prop segments. Rendering happens on demand. Cool. So if it's already doing the like hydration of future requests on the server side, this feels like it could be very powerful if you make the data at those different levels shareable in a way that's easy to grok. It's going to be tough, but this is another one of those like huge steps, but I don't know if it's the right direction until I see the type safe story for it. All I want for Christmas is dark mode Next.js docs. Fair request. Fair request. Will there be a way to update the layout based on the current route? Like change the current selection item on a sidebar of a dashboard? Really good question, Fred. My assumption would be in the layout component, you would still have access to something like use router and would be able to select a key off it, or maybe even select from props that get passed through Next at the page level. So you could choose to re-render at that point. Gonna like the parallel fetching section. Okay, we're here now. Next.js will eagerly initiate data fetches in parallel to minimize waterfalls. Okay, in combination with suspense, React can also start rendering server components immediately before the requests have completed and can slot the results as the requests resolve. Lee thinks I'm correct with the use router thing. That's cool. It'll be a bit weird because part of the promise is that you're not re-rendering the layout, and that would be explicitly re-rendering the layout, and it will probably cause a double render for the children components if you're not careful, but I'm pretty sure that will work. If you had the sidebar as a subcomponent and that subcomponent had the route, you'd be fine. But if you use route in layout, okay, I'll put money on that. If you were to have a thing like this with the blog sidebar, and in here you use router and change the context of this, or change a prop in here as you grab a key off of the route, this now from here down is going to re-render because it has a use router call. My guess is that children's going to render twice. The first time on that first pass, the second time when the use router fires to trigger the update here. I would be, if it doesn't, y'all thought really far ahead and I'm impressed, but it probably does. Cool. Partial fetching and rendering when navigating between sibling routes. Next will only fetch and render from the segment down. Let's take a better look at this. Actually, I didn't give this a deep enough thought. Next.js will eagerly initiate data fetches in parallel to minimize waterfalls. For example, if data fetching sequential, each nested segment in the route couldn't start fetching data until the previous was completed. If rendering was dependent on data fetching, each segment could only render after. So data fetch and render. Cool. Because it knows based on the URL which levels it needs to do data fetching at. This would actually hurt if I was to do what I was talking about earlier, where root layout does the auth check, and then the subcomponents would use that. Because my ideal here, and this is a thing we do a lot, we once authed make requests based on that auth. So dashboard layout based on your auth might request something different, and depending on your auth state might request something entirely different. So we wouldn't want to render dashboard layout until we have auth coming from root layout. For most use cases, especially if the data changes based on purely on URL and cookie, this works. But if there's any way that the request in root would affect the request in the children, this won't work. So that's the catch-22 here, is if your data requests can exist in isolation and don't need data from other places, this just made your app a lot faster. If they do, this didn't affect you at all. With parallel fetching, however, each segment can eagerly start data fetching at the same time. With suspense, rendering also starts immediately, even if the data is not completely loaded. If the data is read before it's available, suspense will be triggered. I like that a lot, actually. I wish that callout was here, because that's huge. There should be some bold chunks of that, too. Happy that you guys are getting a good proofread out of my stream. We're all getting free content right now. It's great. Partial fetching and re-rendering. When navigating between sibling routes, segments, Next will only fetch and render from that segment down. It will not refetch or re-render anything above, unless you're using a route or use router inside of one of those higher level things. For example, if the user navigates between /analytics and settings, it will only re-render this chunk and not the others. This is fun because I'm pretty sure Remix forces a full page re-render on everything. Not positive about that, but like 85-ish% sure. It will be possible to force a refetch of data higher up in the tree. We're still discussing details of how this will look and how we'll update the RFC. Interesting. So you'll basically say, ooh, would this refetch of data be a full like page re-render, or would this be the components are still in line and the data changes? Because as far as I know, most of this data comes through by dumping page props into a JSON blob, or a JavaScript object in a script tag in the page. Would this work by updating that? Would this work by doing a context level? So my question, Lee, is if we do that high up and we have a use effect that's waiting on data from get server side props, because right now if you use effect on get server side props, that effect will only run once when the page loads. Will that effect rerun when a child revalidates that data? Will that data come through as update data that's a new effect? Or would this be a full like kill re-render, you lose the previous context of like the state? I like that answer, Lee. Thank you for the very I don't want to like subtweet anyone right now, but the level of honesty when I ask a question, the answer is, I don't know. We'll look into that. I love that. You'd be surprised how rare that is in the space. Like I'm asking hard questions. I'm not sitting here just like shitting on this for fun. This is like the very deep, crazy things I want to break this tech for. And yeah, I appreciate a lot that with the hard problems you're solving, you're not pretending every problem is solved. You're acknowledging that this is as much a discussion as it is a solution, and we need to keep talking. We need to figure out how all these things work and get applied and solve the problems that we're going to use this stuff to solve. So yeah, thank you guys for being here, for being part of the conversation and being honest when you don't have answers to hard questions. It's huge. Cool. So, conclusion, we're excited, yada, yada. In the next part of SRFC, we'll discuss instant loading states. Ooh, boy. Off-screen stashing with instant back and forward. A new off-screen component that stores a React tree in its state without rendering it to the screen. Leveraging this component, it should be possible to stash routes that have been visited and pre-render them before they are visited. Navigation backwards and forwards to these routes should be instant and restore any previously stored state. Oh boy. Oh boy. This is very cool, actually. There are a ton of gotchas for this. I'm immediately having like, as soon as I read this, like, yes, cool, I'm excited for this. And then I remembered how many of my routes activate AV devices and deactivate them when you unmount the components, and started having an existential crisis. So this Rising Off-Screen Canvas, definitely inspired by that humanoid. It might even be using it. Yeah, I like this idea a lot, even if it's giving me a midlife crisis. Yeah, if you can make this work in a way in my app where it doesn't cause devices to be running in the background without me making significant code changes, holy shit. Low to no faith that can happen, but if you can, good shit. Cool. Might use my app. Yeah, I would give Vercel source access if on the right, you know, I know not to. Yeah, Vercel needs access to my source code. All you. Y'all have my email at this point. Just hit me up. If you want a big Next app that does a lot of client-only stuff, because we have to, we're a video chat app, let me know, and I will send you guys a zip. Cool. Parallel routes. If you have two or more tab bars on a page, it should be possible to have two or more parallel nested route or layouts that can be navigated independently. Interesting. Very interesting. Intercepting routes from within another page normally lead to a different part of the UI when not one visited in this context. A tweak can be expanded and presented like this one a lot too. And then streaming and selective hydration. Yeah, I just realized streaming did not come up much in here. Very interested to see how streaming plays in to all of this. Cool. Thoughts, questions, concerns? How are we feeling about this, y'all? A lot of work was put into this. Huge shout out to Tim, Delba, Sebastian, and Lee all for the work done here. I know at least these two are hanging out right now. So. Are you using WebRTC for ping? Yep. We're a lot of WebRTC. Of course, Lee, thank you for stopping by and answering all our questions. This is a very fun release. I'm excited as hell. Do we have a when I'll be able to play with this? Because I am very excited to try and port ping over. And when I say port, I mean port. There will be no page folder once we adopt this. Implementation work has started. Okay, so not determined yet. Good to know. Appreciate it. This means I won't be touching React 18 until this is done, which is really fun too. Because now when people ask why I'm not using React 18 yet, I have an answer, and it's a good one. Humanoid, next at alpha, do not use or you'll be fired. Joke's on you. You can't fire the CEO. Wow, you made it to the end again. It means unless you went on a fun fact. I hired my editor to work at Ping, which means I don't have an editor for the channel anymore. If you have ideas for content, if there are things from the stream that you think went really well, be sure to bring them up in the Discord, t3.gg/discord. Also, please like, subscribe, share the video with some friends, leave a comment letting us know what you liked about it. I know it's annoying, but it does help the channel a ton, especially the subscribing and the liking of the video. So hit those two buttons if you haven't already. It means a lot. Shut up, cat. Anyways, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.